Good evening and welcome to the Matthew Kelly Show. Happy 4th of July weekend. Had a great weekend here. I took Walter and Harry and Ralph to the Cincinnati Reds game on Friday night and beat the Cubs. Sorry, Chicago. We had an epic game of baseball here in the yard yesterday. I believe Harry was the winner of that one. And lots of swimming and lots of fun. Hope you had a great 4th of July weekend. Lots of reasons to love this amazing country of ours, and happy and honored to call it home. Evan, we're going to do something a little bit different tonight. We open it up to questions on any topic. So let's start going through the questions.
All right. The first one we're going to tackle today, I just saw another entry for it in the chat. Josie from Facebook the other day asked, I'd like to know how you came to live in America.
Excellent. Great 4th of July question. So I started traveling in 93 and traveled to a bunch of different countries. 93, 94, I had some invitations to come here and speak in the States. And I traveled here in the May of 95 to speak for the first time. And I still remember the first night I spoke in Dallas, and it's just a completely different experience. I'd been in almost 20 countries speaking before I came to the United States, and just the audience was just different. It was just, I'd been a lot in Europe, I'd been in Asia, Australasia, obviously at home in Australia. And those audiences, they're not as reactive, you know. And here in America, there's a great back and forth between speaker and audience. And I just remember that night in Dallas very, very clearly. And then I was here for 21 days. I visited 23 cities in 21 days. And it was just like a whirlwind, but it was amazing. It was fun. I came back several times over the next couple of years. And it was around that time that sort of in the late 90s that my spiritual director challenged me to say, you really need to, you know, decide where you want to work, where you want to live. He felt that the travel was having a bad toll on me, especially the international travel. I had traveled in 50 countries at that point, many of them many times over the course of about 5 or 6 years. And he just challenged me. He said, just go away and pray for a month and just think about it. And what kept coming to me is, like, if you want to clean a water supply, you should start as far upstream as possible. And if you clean the water supply, you know, at the bottom of the mountain, so then the 2 villages that are left to experience that water supply, they get clean water, but all those other villages up the mountain, they don't. And from traveling in 50 countries, you see the enormous impact that America is having on the world. And I came to the conclusion that if something doesn't change in America, the world is not going to change. And so it was at that point that I decided to work almost exclusively here in the United States. I started living here in the late 90s. And, you know, by 2000, 2001, I was living here permanently and full time. I then got married in 2009, have 5 wonderful children. And my wife is from Cincinnati. That's how I ended up in Cincinnati. People often ask me that question as well. I love America, and people ask me, what do you love about America? I think the thing that I've learned from traveling so much is that it doesn't matter so much where you are, it matters more who you are with. And what I love about America is the people, is the American spirit. Just the sense that things are possible, that we can do great things, that we can pioneer new discoveries. And that's how I came to live in America. Thanks, Josie, for the question.
That's great. Lots of American spirit happening this weekend. Another question. What are you reading at the moment? I'm actually curious about this myself.
I'm reading a great book at the moment. It's called The Road of Hope. It's called The Road of Hope. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the author's name, but it is the reflections of a Vietnamese cardinal, Catholic cardinal. He became the Archbishop of Saigon I think it was about a month after the war finished in Vietnam. And a couple of years later, he was sent to, what they were calling a re-education camp, but was really a prisoner camp. And he was held as a prisoner for 13 years. We hear about Christian persecution in the past. The mistake we make is we think of Christian persecution as something in the past. I think with all that's going on in our society today, we realize that it's about to be something, and increasingly is something, that is very, very much in the present, in our own life and in our own country. But I think we have been lax for decades of thinking of persecution as something in the past. The reality is that there are thousands of Christians, Catholics, priests that are imprisoned right now today around the world for no other reason than their faith. And so this Archbishop, he spent 13 years in prison, and this book, Road of Hope, is his reflections from that time. And what strikes me is, they're dripping with hope, but also they're very, very practical. They can be lived in the middle of the world. They can be lived in the midst of your work and your relationships and all that sort of thing. And so even though he was isolated in this sort of prisoner camp for 13 years, he still had a full appreciation of life, a full appreciation of, the daily challenges and rituals and routines of our life. And it's just a phenomenal book, Road of Hope. Pick up a copy. It's really beautiful.
Road of Hope. That I think I'm going to get a copy. I'll read through some earlier ones from social media. We'll get to the YouTube chat in a minute. Tim from Twitter asks, how do you slow life down living in a digital age?
It's a great question. I think it's something we're all struggling with in different ways. And I think that we each have to come up with our own answers to these questions. I do think unplugging is part of the answer. Maybe there's a time when you unplug. Maybe there's a day when you unplug. One of the things I've done is I've turned notifications off on my phone. So my phone isn't constantly dinging and binging and all these sorts of things. So from time to time, I check my email on my phone. Yes, I check my text messages on my phone. Yes, but I'm not getting notifications. And I find that's had a real impact on the number of distractions in my life. I don't think we realize how distracting distractions are. I read a study recently that said the average person who is in a state of focus takes 23 minutes to return to that state of focus after distraction. Okay, so if you think about all the distractions in our lives, most people in the course of a day, in the course of a work day, are probably never getting to a state of focus. And if they do, a distraction can take them out of that instantly, and it can take as long as 23 minutes to return to that. So I think little things like that can have an enormous impact. And as I've said, in many scenarios on many topics before, don't let what you can't do interfere with what you can do. Find some small thing that you can do this week and apply that. You don't have to overhaul all the technology in your life, but do something like the notifications thing, or just say, hey, I'm only going to check my email on my phone at these times of the day. I don't think there's any universal rules that can be shared, but I do think each of us need to find what works for us.
I can attest to turning the notifications off a little bit myself. Definitely made a huge difference. Moving on, another question here. I heard you talk about the difference between pleasure and happiness in the past, but can you give us a refresher?
Yeah, it's a great topic. One of my favorite topics. We're on a quest for happiness, and we're on a quest for happiness because we are created for happiness. God created us for happiness. And that's very clear. I mean, you pick up the catechism, you open up chapter 1.1, it talks about how God created us for happiness. And that's why we yearn for it. That's why we hunger for it. That's why this yearning and these hungers are so strong. We want to be happy because God wants us to be happy. The problem is we get confused about what will actually make us happy. And pleasure is one of the great confusers when it comes to this quest for happiness. What fundamentally is the difference between pleasure and happiness? Pleasure cannot be sustained beyond the activity producing it. Okay, so we eat, we experience pleasure. We stop eating, the pleasure stops. And that is true for all the things that bring pleasure. There may be an afterglow of some pleasure, but ultimately to perpetuate that pleasure, you have to perpetuate the activity producing the pleasure. And that is where we end up in all sorts of problems, including addiction, to name but one. Happiness is different to that. Happiness can be sustained beyond the activity producing it. So for example, you go for a run. You don't feel like going for a run, or you go for a walk, or you go to the gym. You don't feel like it, but you force yourself to do it. And the interesting thing is, when you get done working out, you're always glad you worked out. And so the difference between pleasure and happiness is that happiness can be sustained beyond the activity producing it. Even if the activity required sacrifice, it can produce a lasting happiness in our lives. And so what's important to understand is we're not saying happiness good, pleasure bad. No, God gave us the gift of pleasure. It has a rightful place in our life. It's a matter of finding that rightful place. But if we are seeking happiness, it's critically important that pleasure is not going to answer that desire that we have within us for happiness. It has a role to play in our lives, but it's not going to create lasting happiness in a changing world. And of course, that's what we yearn for. We don't yearn for momentary happiness. We yearn for lasting happiness in a changing world, and a rapidly changing one at that. And so that fundamentally is the difference between happiness and pleasure. I talk about it in The Rhythm of Life. It's on a couple of my YouTube videos, the Passion and Purpose series. What's next, Evan?
Okay, I pulled this one because it's pretty timely. Sorry, I missed the name. I just finished reading your latest book, Life is Messy. Wow, thank you. My question is, this is a deeply personal book. How did you decide how much of yourself to share publicly in this way? What did you include? What did you not include? How did you decide to do this?
Yeah, so it is a very different book. I guess first thing is probably some people wondering how this person got the book, seeing as it does not, the release date is not until the 15th of August. But Dynamic Catholic is selling advanced copies of the book. So you can order a copy today, they'll ship it to you tomorrow. We're doing that for our friends at Dynamic Catholic, and then it'll be available for pre-order on Amazon probably the middle of July, and then is released in the middle of August, along with the Audible audio book, the ebook and things like that. But it's a great question. This is a very different book. It's a book that is drawn from my personal journals. from a very difficult time in my life. And, you know, how do I decide what to include, what not to include? My hope is that the reader will get to the end of the book and say, wow, this is a book about me. Not get to the end of the book and say, wow, that's a book about Matthew Kelly and his life and his struggles. Certainly, I talk about my life, I talk about my struggles, heartaches, and, you know, those sorts of things. But what I try to do is share enough of that to be helpful, to share enough of that to help the reader sort of get into the part of their life that I'm trying to lead them into. But not share so much that it becomes a book about me. And I guess ultimately every reader gets to decide, you know, how successful was I at accomplishing that. But the early feedback's been phenomenal. You know, I've really appreciated sort of the support, encouragement, some fantastic comments on social media. I love, you know, when I publish a book, I love seeing like what section do people gravitate towards, you know? And so if you are posting on social, if you are reading the book, I'd love to hear like, wow, this section was the one that, you know, really resonated with me or really got me. But thanks for the question.
All right. Go to the next one here. Okay, is it really possible to love everyone? I mean, I know we say that, but practically, is that possible? From you two.
Yeah, great question. So the answer is it depends on what we think love is, you know, and, you know, there's these words and we think we know what they mean. There's these words and we think that when other people say them, they mean the same thing as when we say them. And that is almost never the case. And love is, you know, one of the things that our society is more confused about than ever before, and maybe than anything. You know, if you just listen to radios, you know, the top 100 songs on the radio, and you drew your definition of love from that, it'd be a pretty sad thing. You know, it would be a trivial, shallow, a superficial thing. And certainly that kind of love, no, you can't love everyone like that. And not only can't you love everyone like that, you shouldn't love everyone like that. And not only shouldn't you love everyone like that, you probably shouldn't love anybody like that, because that isn't actually love, you know? And when you get down to it, why is this sort of poverty of our understanding of love in popular culture? Because it tends to focus on ourselves. And that isn't what love is all about, you know. The great teachers, the great philosophers essentially came to the conclusion that to love is to will the good of the other person. Okay? To love is to will the good of the other person. To love is to want good things for the other person. And if we understand love in that context, then yes, it is possible to love everybody. It is possible to desire good things for everybody, even people, you know, that you don't like, and there's going to be plenty of them, you know, even people that you don't get along with at work, even relatives that, you know, cause problems every time the family get together, even people who have harmed you, you know. It is still possible to love them in the sense of willing good things for them, desiring for good things to happen to them and for them and in them. And if we understand love in that context, then yes, it really is possible to love everyone.
That's there's definitely some things to take away from that. To will the good of the other person. Powerful. So we got some great questions here tonight. And here's another one. I'm struggling to find time to pray each day. For years it wasn't a problem, but for months now it's been a struggle. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, okay. So firstly, to realize this is not unique, you know. You're not malfunctioning. There isn't something wrong with you. You know, that this happens to everyone at different times in their lives and in their spiritual journey. What I pick up on the question is, you know, it wasn't a problem for many years. And so, but for months now, it has been a problem. And so what I would ask is, like, what happened there? You know, when it started to be a problem, what happened there? It's like, if you go to the doctor and you say, doctor, I got a sore leg. My leg hurts. What does the doctor do? He says, well, where does it hurt? You know, when did it start hurting? You know, and you say, well, a few months ago. He says, well, what happened a few months ago? And you're like, oh, I don't know, or I was playing with the kids in the yard and slipped over, or something like that. So I'd look at that time in your life where that did change. There may be something there, it may not be. And then I would ask myself, okay, what time of the day am I dedicating to prayer? Do I need to mix that up? And there may be a time in your life where you pray every morning. That's the time. There may be a time in your life where you pray on your lunch break. There may be a time in your life where you pray in the evening. In different seasons of our lives, God calls us to different routines and rituals in the spiritual life, and that's okay. But we need to pay attention to that. And so, if you're struggling in this, it's more critical than ever that you give your best time each day to prayer. That you increase your chances of success by saying, okay, when is the time in my day where I'm most likely not going to be called away, not going to be distracted, not going to fall asleep, and to go through some of these sort of fundamentals that we think about maybe very early on in the spiritual life, but we can forget or neglect or overlook as we get deeper into our spiritual journey. And so I just encourage you to say, okay, when is the best time for me to pray? And am I making it, I think the next step, am I making it a priority? Is it a sacred priority on my calendar? Is it even on my calendar? Most of the time we don't put the most important things in our lives on our calendars. We put all the other stuff on our calendars, you know, and then the most important things get crowded out of our lives. And so if you're having this struggle, I think put it on your calendar, make sure you're giving it the right time. And if you're not sure what the right time is, try some different things. Try one time for a week, then try another time for a week. Maybe keep a little journal, you know, give yourself a sense of how it is going. But to go back to basics. And I think sometimes that's hard if you've been praying for many, many years. It can be hard to go back to basics, but the call is always to mastering the basics. What's next, Evan?
So a little bit of a pivot here. We're going to move from the spiritual to more the business side. So he writes in, I'm in charge of hiring someone at work for the first time. Do you have any advice?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to understand is that hiring people is incredibly difficult. Okay. You need a process, and I encourage you to get a process. When I wrote my book, The Culture Solution, I think chapter 5 is about hiring. And I got more comments on that chapter than anything else in the book. In fact, I might have got more comments on that chapter than anything I've ever written in the business realm, because I think it is something that people universally struggle with. We tend to hire too quickly. and we tend to fire too slowly. So we make mistakes too quickly and we fix our mistakes too slowly. There's tons of great studies out there. You can Google them and find them. But we have so many biases, and so I read a study last year that said that most people decide within 20 seconds of meeting somebody if they are going to hire that person for the role. Okay, within 20 seconds. What do you know about a person within 20 seconds? What do you know about their work history? You haven't spoken to their references. You don't know if they're capable of doing what it is you want to do. And so it is a difficult thing. It is something worth spending some time on. Whatever time you spend, preparing now will save you hundreds of hours, for the rest of your life, for the rest of your career. And to keep in mind that we're all hiring people all the time, okay? You go into a restaurant, you're hiring someone to cook your dinner. You're hiring someone to serve you at the table, okay? And that's just one example of the reality that we are hiring people all the time to do things for us. And sometimes we are satisfied with their work, and sometimes we are dissatisfied with their work. But most of the time, we don't really have a process that we go through. In the book, I talk about sort of the cornerstone of my hiring process and the hiring process that we use in all of the organizations I'm involved in. I'm always looking for three things when I hire a person. And these might be the three things for you. There might be three different things for you. It doesn't matter, but I think it does matter that you have a sense of, okay, what are three things that are sort of non-negotiable that every person that I hire needs to have? For me, the three things are committed, coachable, and aware. Okay, committed, coachable, and aware. Committed, it's hard to say, right? Because the person's interviewing for the job. So you don't know, are they committed to the job? They can't really be committed to the job because they don't really have the job yet. So what do I look for there in the interview process? I look for history of commitment. Has this person been able to commit to other things in the past? Has this person been able to commit to other roles, to commit to projects? And do they have a track record of commitment? Because if you're hoping that this person will commit to your project, to your organization, and it's the first time they're committing to anything in their life, then I think you're out on a limb. I think you're taking a massive risk. So committed, coachable, and aware. Coachable. So champions love feedback. I've seen that, in my consulting work. I've had the chance to work with, major league teams across many disciplines. And, champions love feedback. They're like, what can I do better, coach? How can I do it better, coach? I need an extra half a second, coach. Where do I get it from? What do you see that I'm not seeing, coach? So they're coachable. And in the corporate world, we don't have a really good feedback loop. In the culture solution, I talk about the idea of an annual review, which I think is a complete waste of time. Because it's the slowest feedback loop in the history of the world. The reality is we need to shorten that feedback loop. It needs to be a very short feedback loop. Professional athletes, they get feedback all the time, I was at an NFL game last year or the year before, and the players come into the locker room after the game, and in their locker, okay, before they've just come off the field, but sitting in their locker is a printout of their stats for the game, and then on the back for the season. And all that was put together between, when the game ended and when they got to their locker. And of course, at any point in the game, they can look up at the scoreboard and they get instant feedback. And so professional athletes are getting feedback all the time. The coach doesn't wait until, annual review. Coach doesn't even wait a week. If the coach sees something he coaches, he intervenes, he steps in and says, we've got to take a look at this. We've got to think about this. And he does it instantly. And so thing I would say is get used to taking feedback. Don't see it as a personal attack. Don't see it as personal criticism. Just see it as someone trying to help you get better, someone trying to help you improve. And secondly, to get good at giving feedback, which is difficult because nobody teaches us how to do it. We tend to feel a little bit hesitant or awkward about doing it. But it is something that, all leaders need to be good at, all parents need to be good at. And it is a way to love people. It is a way to be very kind to somebody. If you see someone can improve at something and you don't tell them about it, that's not kindness. And so what we discover is there's great virtue in all of these habits, even though we find them predominantly in, let's say, the business world. So committed, coachable. And then the third piece is aware. Awareness is disappearing. And this is really an emotional intelligence, right? We talk about EQ, talk about IQ and EQ. Emotional intelligence. Very often people talk about emotional intelligence, but when you say to them, okay, what is that? It's emotional intelligence. Okay, yeah, but give me an example of emotional intelligence. Well, emotional intelligence. No, I don't know. That's why I'm asking. And very often we don't actually identify things that are real living practical examples of emotional intelligence. And awareness is one of them. Okay. What is it? Are we aware of what's going on around us? Are we aware of what's going on inside us? Feedback's a great thing. When someone gives you feedback, are you aware of, okay, what happens inside you? Do you become defensive? Do you become resentful? Do you become grateful? Do you become hopeful because you know you can get better through that feedback? How are you reacting internally to that feedback? And are you aware of that? So are you aware of what's happening within you? Are you aware of what's happening around you? We all know people who never let you get a word into a conversation. Are they aware of that? Probably not. And we all know people who have different, in fact, we all are people who have different quirky behaviors, and we're not aware of how they're affecting other people in different situations and different circumstances. And so this awareness is critical. It's especially critical on a team, and that team could be marriage, a family, or that team could be work, organization, or a project. But to be aware of, okay, this is my work. This project is due 2 weeks from now, but I see my colleague over there seems a bit stressed out today. I know that her project is due tomorrow. Maybe there's something I can help her with today to, relieve some of the stress that's going on in her life and at work. And it may be she's just stressed out about the project. It may be she's stressed out about, she just found out her dad is sick, or something else in her personal life that is causing that distraction. So, and that stress more than distraction. So they're the three things I look for when I'm hiring someone: committed, coachable, aware. If you're hiring someone for the first time, I'd say read some articles, read chapter 5 of Culture Solution. It's about hiring with rigorous discipline, and even things like, if you're going to interview 10 candidates, ask them all the same questions. You can ask them other questions as well, but make sure that you have a set of questions that you ask to every single candidate, because it brings uniformity to the process, and it allows you to identify the candidate who is best suited for the project, for the team, for the organization. So good luck with the hiring. It's difficult, it's difficult. Take your time. And, I mean, the thing that I press home more than anything else in that chapter is, if it's not a definite yes, it is a definite no. Okay. There's no middle ground when it comes to hiring. There's too much at stake. If it is not a definite yes, it is a definite no. And you got to wait for the right candidate, or you got to keep looking for the right candidate.
Yeah, that if it's not a definite yes, it's a definite no. It's a principle you can take in other parts of your life as well. Very powerful and interesting. There's an add-on to this question here. So this person's saying they watched your YouTube video on decade thinking, the one you did for Nothing is Random, the Forbes articles. And they said, what would you like to see Catholics doing over the next decade, going in the theme of decade thinking?
Yeah, so I guess, we pass into the new decade. Part of what I'd like to see is a much greater intentionality. This decade is before us. What's the plan? What are we doing? What's the goal? How do we want the church to be different 10 years from now than it is today? Or the church in America to be different now than 10 years from now than it is today? What do we want to have accomplished in 10 years? I think that people are hungry for, vision, intentionality. It's a beautiful line in the scriptures where it says, your old men will see visions and your young men will dream dreams. And I think we need a time like that again. We need the older members of our community, men and women, to see great visions for the future. And we need our younger members of the community, men and women, to dream dreams. And if you look at the sort of the great ages of our history, we have built big, beautiful things, and I was in Paris, maybe a couple of years ago now, when Cathedral of Notre Dame caught on fire and was burning. And literally standing in the window of my hotel, watching this astounding devastation. And everyone was heartbroken, not just Catholics. It's just like universally, there was like something, this is a tragedy. I think the next day they come out and work out it's going to cost like, I don't know, $1 billion or something to restore it. And the Louis Vuitton Foundation, they make the handbags and whatever. I believe they came out within 24 hours and donated, I want to say it was $250 million. It may have been more than that, but it was an astounding amount of money. And then all these other organizations, companies, and people had nothing to do with Catholicism stepping up and say, we have to restore this treasure. Throughout our history, we have a history of building big, beautiful things. Now, not just things. Okay, so yes, have we built great cathedrals in many, many hundreds of cities around the world? Absolutely, no question. But we built up big, beautiful other things as well. Like Catholic education system is a big, beautiful thing. It's an astounding thing. And I think that it would be great for us to take a beat, to take a moment, to pause and say, okay, We have this decade before us as Catholics here in America. What great thing can we do with this decade? What big, beautiful, great, magnificent thing can we do? And I believe it has to be beyond our bounds. I mean, one of the reasons I have made YouTube an initiative at this time is because I believe we need a voice in the culture. I believe what we need to do big, beautiful things in the middle of the world, in the middle of the culture. And so whatever big, beautiful thing we're going to do, it doesn't necessarily mean we need to build another church or build another education system, but we do need to get in tune with the Spirit and ask ourselves, 77 million Catholics in America, what is God looking to do with us in the next 10 years? And I don't know what that is, but I think it's time we got the best minds of our time together to ponder the question, because I think people would rally. I think people would rally. I think people are hungry to see something wonderful happen for the church again. I think it's been incredibly difficult 20 years to be Catholic now in America. What's next, Evan?
I feel a little bit inspired from that one. But it all goes one moment at a time over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So the next question, what is one question I can ask myself if I want to go deeper into the spiritual life right now, tomorrow, and then for the next 10 years?
I think there's many. I think one is like, what are you afraid of? We all have fears. And again, God gave us the ability to fear. It's not a malfunction in the human being. It's like you get close to the edge of a cliff, you become afraid. That's good. And that means that your system is functioning properly. If you get very close to a 3,000-foot precipice and you don't get afraid, that's an indication that all is not well. But of course, this fear translates into other things. Sometimes it belongs, sometimes it doesn't, but it always comes to teach us something, And so I think to explore, what do you fear? What are you afraid of? I think leaders often have to think about, okay, what's the worst case scenario that could unfold here in whatever situation? So maybe you want to look at it, sort of look at your life and say, okay, what am I most afraid of in my life? Or maybe you want to look at a particular situation and say, okay, well, what am I most afraid of in this particular situation? And what is God saying to me through that fear? How is that fear inviting me to surrender more, to trust more, to do something differently, to step away from the precipice? Because I do believe that, God sends messengers like fear into our lives to teach us something. And fear is a very powerful one. So I think if you want to grow in your spiritual life, I'd say one of the questions is, what are you afraid of? Another one I give you is like, what's motivating you? What's driving you at this time in your life? And you can look at your life in a macro sense and ask that question, or you can look at a specific situation. You could look at what's happening at work, or you can look at what's happening in a relationship with a friend, with a spouse, with a child, and say, okay, what's driving me here? What is my motive? And what we discover is we have many motives, as we talked about last week. So I think there are two questions that can lead us to very deep places in the spiritual life.
You always ask these challenging questions. That fear isn't bad. It's such a cognitive dissonance. Something definitely to chew on here. Another question. I realized I wasn't reading the names before, but Debbie asks, how do you put all your faith in Jesus when, as a woman, I'm the only breadwinner in the house? and I do not feel very sure of my job lately. They have been laying off a lot of people, and I do not feel secure. I have a daughter that works part-time and takes care of her son. What is your advice?
So it's heartbreaking, right? It's like two sentences, and it is heartbreaking, and this is one story of, I think, millions of stories that are unfolding in our culture at the moment, where people do feel exposed, they do feel vulnerable, they do feel legitimately afraid, for their safety, security in many forms. I think Debbie started a question like, how do you put all your faith in God, or how do you put all your faith in Jesus? The answer is it's incredibly difficult. And it's relatively easy when things are going well in our life, never easy, but relative to the situation you're describing, it's much easier when things are going well in our life to say, trust in God. I know God's got my back. I know God will provide. I know God will take care of us. But I give you a couple of things to think about, Debbie. One, spiritual, and then, something else that is practical. From a spiritual point of view, whether you trust God or you don't trust God, or you're struggling to trust God in this moment, in this situation, I think just to pray honestly, one of the things that my children have taught me is like how to pray with like unabashed honesty. I remember like Isabel once when she was like, I don't know, 4 years old or something. And we were having story time before she goes to bed. And then I'm like, all right, let's do your prayers now. And she's like, she does sign of the cross. And then she says, good night, Jesus. Really tired tonight, so we're not going to talk too much, and I will talk to you again tomorrow. And like, that was it. She was done. And it's like, it's beautiful, right? Because it's honest and it's relational. It's like, this is what I'm dealing with, Jesus. You understand. And, I'll catch you tomorrow. And I think many of us haven't prayed that honestly. Long periods of our lives go by without praying that honestly. And so, Debbie, if you're able to trust God or not able to trust God, I would just say, hey, God, this is where I'm at. I want to trust you, but I'm struggling with that. Give me the desire to trust you, increase my trust, that sort of thing. So that on the spiritual side of things, I'd say just pray very honestly. Don't try to pretend. You don't have to pretend. You've got this situation in your life that is incredibly difficult. You don't have to pretend with God. And then the other thing on a very practical level, I would say, is that like when I hear that question, okay, just two sentences, like my heart goes out to you. And that's not because I'm an extraordinary human being. It's because I'm a human being. We do want to help each other, I think. When we're backed into a corner and we're afraid and fearful ourselves, we struggle then. But there are people in your life, Debbie, who you shouldn't keep this from. There are people in your life who do want to help you. There are people in your life who should be made aware of how you feel, because they might hear of a better job that's available for you tomorrow or next week. And because you shared with them your struggle, they will think, oh yeah, this has come available. I should talk to Debbie and make that connection. When I wrote The Dream Manager, one of the things that really astounded me was it's an incredibly simple idea. I mean, astoundingly simple idea, Dream Manager. It's like, what are your dreams? You know, work out what your dreams are, that sort of thing. But the thing that really astounded me was, like, when we tell other people, I had this dream of this, most people's reaction is, how can I help? Especially if they have some ability, some contact, some knowledge. You know, if you say to someone, oh, my dream is to run a marathon, and that person's run 5 marathons, that person's natural instinct is to say, I want to help you with that. You know, you should visit this website, you should read this book, you know, you should watch this video about training. That's the healthy, natural human instinct when we hear about other people's dreams. It's also the healthy, natural human instinct when we hear about other people's struggles and sufferings. And so, not to keep this to yourself, Debbie, but to share it with not the whole world, but there are certain people in your life that you will feel called to share it with. Share it with them. Share it with them bravely. Share it with them boldly, because it may be that God is bringing those people into your life to help you in this situation. And then the last thing I would say is this, is that you describe the situation, you know what you're afraid of in that situation. But I think it's important also that you get very clear about, okay, how do you want this situation to evolve? How could this situation evolve in a healthy way to a good place for you? And to get really very clear about that in your mind, so that you're not always drawn to the negative outcome or the possible negative outcome, but that you can set your heart, set your mind on the positive outcome, and that you can pray for that, and that you can ask people to help you in that. I hope that's helpful. It's an incredibly difficult situation.
Yeah. And there's another sort of an add-on to that question as well. Michelle asked a little bit earlier in the chat. Sometimes I feel that because I don't have a terminal illness, homeless, or any other, sort of major problems, I'm not suffering for others. Can little things like our daily concerns actually be beneficial as well?
So, there's so much here in this one question, and I know we're almost out of time, but Paul talks about the concept of praying constantly. We can't all just go into our churches and pray all the time. It's clear that that is not what Paul meant. So what did he mean? He meant that every honest human activity can be transformed into prayer. You changing the baby's diaper, that can be a prayer. Someone charges in front of you in the supermarket, that can be a prayer. Your flight gets delayed, that can be a prayer. Everything, an hour of work can be a prayer. Everything can be transformed into prayer. And so I think comparisons are worthless in a world of individuals. I think to compare yourself, or certainly your suffering, to someone else's suffering, I think is a mistake, because the reality is you're only taking a look at one part of your life, and there are different seasons in our lives, and there are seasons of preparation and there are seasons of participation. And this may be a season of preparation for you. God may be strengthening you. He may be comforting you in this season, because he knows that at some other time in your life, you are going to need to draw on the strength and the comfort of this time in your life to get through that other time in your life. And so I think to trust that there is a providence, that whatever is on your plate right now is what you can excel at, is what you can offer to God, is what you can, is really the material that transforms us, that allows us to create holy moments, and allows us to step toward wholeness, and to live an integrated life, a life of integrity, and sometimes God's doing things in our lives. It's like, when they build a highway, everyone's upset because there's construction and there's traffic and there's these sorts of things. When the highway's finished, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of cars can move down that highway very, very quickly. And so sometimes in your life, God is building spiritual infrastructure. And he might be doing that right now. He's building spiritual infrastructure so that, great things can be built upon that infrastructure at another time in your life. We have time for one more, Evan?
I think so. Hopefully this one you can answer in a couple of minutes. Joseph on YouTube asks, do I need to plan time for doing nothing? What do I do with silence? Talking about the classroom of silence. I feel like I have to fill my time or it is wasted. Is it okay to have a full schedule of good things, or is that just a euphemism for being too busy?
Yeah, okay. So I think I saw this last week, and we didn't get to this question. So I appreciate you catching that. I think that I think we do need time, white space, I call it, on our schedule. I think good things can happen when we have white space on our schedule, especially in relationships, but also creatively. Most people are much more creative than they realize. Most people are much more innovative than they realize. Most people have no time for creativity and innovation in their lives and on their schedule. And that creativity and innovation can express itself in many, many different ways. Yes, it can express itself at work, but it can also express itself, in a romantic relationship. It can express itself in parenting. It can express itself, as a mentor, as a coach, in just so many different ways. So I do think you need to plan time, not to do nothing as you describe it, but to plan time when nothing is scheduled. And then when you come to that time, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 2 hours, maybe it's a whole day, I don't know. Different for different people at different stages of their life, depending on what their commitments are at that time in their life. But when you come to that time with nothing planned and nothing scheduled, sort of this carefree timelessness that I've talked about, then just to have a moment of prayer and say, hey, God, here I am. I've got this day, I've got this hour or 2 hours, whatever it is. What do you want me to do with it? What it does is it teaches us to live in the present moment. So much of our lives are scheduled, and my life, as much as anyone else, maybe more than anyone else, there's just a lot of things that are scheduled, and we need these experiences to help us learn to live in the present moment. Can it be awkward? Yes. You fumble around the first few times. Yeah, maybe, probably. Is the silence and the solitude of that intimidating to many people? Yeah, it is. And I think to be open about that, to be honest about that, Alan Hunt asked me a question, I don't know, a week ago or so. He says, like, sort of, how do you get a take on sort of where you are in life? How restless you are or how at peace you are. And I said to him, I got this really good litmus test. All I do is I sit down in a chair and I sit still and I see how long I can stay there for. And sometimes I'm agitated and irritated and so restless I can't even stay there for 3 minutes. And on other days I could just sit there for the whole day. And so sometimes, it's amazing spiritual experience just to sit still, just to sit quiet, just to sit alone, just to be with God, just to be, and let amazing things happen. It's 9 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. Have a fantastic week. God bless you and all those you love. God bless America. And I look forward to seeing you again next week.